Hello, thank you for joining me at Bert's Books. This time not actually technically talking about a book, although it's related to a book which I covered, I suppose, around August this year. Film based on Willi Heinrich's Cross of Iron, or as it was originally titled, The Willing Flesh. The film has recently undergone an extensive restoration process, results of which are on here. This quite plush 3-disc steelbook set. The film here both on high definition DVD and Blu-ray, and I think it's been restored and tidied up directly from the original negative. What would make a film worth the bother of going to that expense? Well, if you're familiar, and I'm guessing you're familiar with the works of Sam Peckinpah, or Sam Peckinpah as some pronounce him, this has the reputation of being his last great film, and on that basis alone I think it's worth having a nice copy of it. But really, this film I first saw, I suppose it would have been in my late teens. It came onto TV late at night. I was kind of aware of its existence. I'd seen the paperback in the shops as a kid, so I was aware the film existed and that it was based on a novel by Willi Heinrich. Further than that, I didn't really know a great deal until it popped up on late night TV when I was about 18. I think at that point I realised you would have seen a lot of war film. I won't say I'd never seen a good one up to that point. I'd say I realised I'd seen a lot of bad ones. I don't think I'd seen one quite this good. The only comparable thing, I think Das Boot had come on British TV by that point, which I suppose would have been to many this kind of point at which people realised that it was possible for an English-speaking audience to buy into a Second World War film that was based on a German perspective. However, this predates Das Boot, I think, by about 3 or 4 years, and on that basis I think might have been a difficult sell to English-speaking audiences. It was a hit in a lot of other territories. English-speaking, for various reasons, I think not a great hit at the time, but proved, what they call a sleeper hit, that its reputation over the years has just grown and grown and grown. I was knocked back by it. Alright, things that I'd seen at the time that I'd say may have been described as comparatively powerful, other than Das Boot, I think I'd probably seen both versions of that existed at the time of All Quiet on the Western Front. However, this film just struck me as uniquely powerful, and it remains so. In fact, that's not to say it's without its kind of flaws or little idiosyncrasies. As I discussed in my video on the book, the film does deviate quite significantly from the plot of the book in certain ways. However, it does stay fairly true to the feel and the message and the basic relationship between the characters, or the major characters within the book. So what do you get for your money with this? I mean, obviously you're looking at splashing out a bit for it. It comes in this kind of obviously quite hardcore casing. I think these images are from promo graphics of the time. There's this kind of loose, bit inconvenient actually, there's loose card thing with the credits on the back. Now, should we deal with the minuses first? There's no kind of booklet or printed anything within. One of the discs is in the player still, by the way, but there's no booklet with this. It would have been nice to have had an essay or some notes with it as a printed extra. What would have been a really nice touch, in fact, would have been a disc of the soundtrack. I think Ernest Gold's soundtrack to this film is of a quality that's suitable to this production. It's a superb soundtrack. But that would have been nice. However, you do get, as I said, you get Ultra HD disc and a Blu-ray disc of the restored film. Now, I'm not sure if much has happened to it in the interim. I watched the Blu-ray. Anyway, I can speak for that. The quality difference between that and the old print that I've got is noticeable. It's much clearer, the colour's better. But obviously care has gone into this. Now, on top of those, there's this special features disc which is packed with various featurettes. I think many of them have the involvement of the archivist or film historian who provides the commentary on the main discs, which I've also, I don't often get through those things, but I did get through the entirety of this. It's by film historian Mike Ziegel. He provides a commentary which isn't one of those scene by scene, this is what happens. It's more him talking about the background of the film, sort of incidental anecdotes, his experiences in researching Peckinpah's work. He seems to have met quite a few of the cast involved with this while they were alive. So there's a lot of detail there. It's a really good commentary, actually. If you're at all into this, it's worth sitting through. And I believe Mike Siegel has a certain amount of involvement on the featurettes featured on Blu-ray disc 2. Now these include interviews. There's footage of various cast members talking about it. There's a certain amount of discussion from David Warner, who plays Captain Kiesel. If we're going to pick at flaws in the film, and I don't think there's any flaws really that seriously spoil it. I think any of these things I'm picking at, they're the kind of flaws that I can just suspend disbelief for them and just kind of go, right, that it doesn't affect my enjoyment of or the quality of the film. One of the things that is quite often picked up on, while it's great on detail in a lot of ways, hair policy within this film, 1940s hair, wasn't strictly reflected across many of the cast members. I mean, you can see Coburn there, a bit long at the sides and back. Now, I think Warner is the worst offender. He's got this kind of tousled 60s rock star look about him. But the thing is, the way he conveys that character, you can totally kind of make an exception for it, because he portrays that character, he inhabits that character so well. There's this weariness about Captain Kiesel. He entertains no illusions about any kind of glory or worth in the tasks they're engaged in. Neither particularly is James Mason's Colonel Brandt. But Kiesel, I think, a really interesting character in this, because there's a lot of bleakness to that comes with the subject matter. There are a few little glimmers of hope, if you like, to this. One, I think, is invested in Captain Kiesel. He's one of the few characters from this that we're given to understand has a future. The future, in fact, Germany's future, in a way, is invested in, he's a flawed character. He's not a conventional hero, but as Colonel Brandt, the James Mason character, says to him, "You're a brave man, braver than you think. There's nothing wrong with you except you smoke too much," which I think was an in-joke. Actually, there's a lot of explanation of little details like that within the extras. There's this lovely speech by Colonel Brandt when he says goodbye. He packs Kiesel off on a dispatch bike. In the new Germany, if such a thing is allowed to exist, there will be a need for builders and for thinkers, and that is what Captain Kiesel, for his flaws, is invested with. So he is this glimmer of a world beyond the madness and bloodshed and horror that is represented within this. But anyway, sort of somewhat ironically, there's a bit of the kind of obviously more recent interview footage of David Warner being interviewed about this film, and ironically there's a part of that where his hair looks really good for 1940s. He's kind of had it trimmed at the sides, much more sort of period appropriate. But anyway, that's by the by. There's also some interesting interview footage with Vadim Glavner, who plays Cairn, who's the guy he's got the kind of noticeably damaged ear, and he's the one, famously, with one of his colleagues puts it, the faulty exhaust pipe. He's the flatulent character in this. There's some interview footage, quite interesting footage of him discussing his relationship with Peckinpah, which sort of slightly complicated at the start, but I think they sort of established an affection within themselves. I mean, there's a lot of this between the various actors discussing their experiences on this. You build up this picture of Peckinpah and the condition he was in at the time of making this, and that's kind of consolidated with one of the featurettes here, which is a really good one, Passion and Poetry, Sam Peckinpah's War, which kind of goes into a lot of the background detail of how this film happened and how it played out, and it really does seem to have been this kind of knife edge. It could easily just have fallen apart or never happened at all, and somehow the various parties involved kept this thing afloat, and Peckinpah managed, though as is described by I think a couple of witnesses within here, Peckinpah was drinking. Peckinpah is described during the making of this as knocking down 2 towards 3 full bottles of spirits during the course of a working day. There's a point where Santa Berger, who plays the nurse, she had previous history acting for Peckinpah. I think she was quite concerned. I think she possibly entered into this more as a favour to him. I don't think she was very approving of Second World War films, and certainly didn't think this one should have been made. Now, it's explained in the commentary that Peckinpah he engaged on some of his research involved going into an area of the archive in Germany that doesn't seem to, at the time, have been generally available to ordinary Germans or to the German education system. I think possibly some of that is what you're seeing in that brilliant intro montage. This is a film that it grabs you at the start with this, a now famous title sequence, which is this juxtaposition of footage of the time. It contrasts, you've got the images of the kind of idealised of victory or of, the propagandist. Some of the footage in this montage is this kind of these propaganda reels of kind of Hitlerjugend out on their little manoeuvres. Part of the recurring theme within this is this exercise in them climbing a mountain with the flag to pin it up and sort of do that salute. But this is intercut with images of victory, big parades and the sort of happy, adoring crowds, contrasted with the footage of these bitter images of defeat. I think a lot of them are from Stalingrad. You get these images of these beaten, frostbitten shells of men. So there's this already quite arresting kind of juxtaposition of footage, and it all plays out to Ernest Gold has adapted Das Kinderlied, I think it's called, this German old folk song. Lyrically could be seen as quite emblematic. The Hanschen Klein song, which tells we're going to translate that generically as Little Johnny. It's a song about he walks off into the big wide world for 7 years, and that, if we're going to count prior to 1939 Germany's kind of annexation manoeuvres and things like that, you could loosely say 7 years, I suppose. It works so well the way Gold has sort of adapted that song. He interweaves in these, it's on the front of it, it's this nice cheery children's song, but he interweaves in these kind of unsettling undercurrents into it. Suddenly the song stops and you get this kind of unsettling orchestral, this ominous thing which matches the footage that's happening at the time, and that then you get this kind of blare of, was either a rally, this kind of blare of trumpets, and this works into this. I think a lot of people assume what then happens is this kind of traditional German military march. It's not. I think it's Ernest Gold has kind of concocted one. If you listen closely to it, it is concocted along just the basic melody of the Hanschen Klein song, but it turns into this big bombastic military kind of parade march. Now there's something quite sinisterly seductive about that. It's like it's almost inviting the listener join the march kind of thing. I don't know if that's deliberate or just my reading of it, but as this is happening, the film actually starts appearing within these propaganda clips. This very clever montage where you suddenly realise, oh hang on, I'm watching snatches of the film happening now. James Coburn and his platoon in the Russian forest, where they appear at first. I mean, they're a reconnaissance platoon, but they're out on this thing to silence a Russian mortar battery. They appear at first as this kind of bunch of cutthroats who appear out of the woods like ghosts, just decimate this Russian unit. But they do it with, there's these kind of strange little touches of tenderness, both in that this happens throughout the film actually. Amid the violence and the horror, there are these little touches of tenderness with it, which kind of humanise the characters. There's a bit where, forget if it's Kruger or Cairn, one of them is dispensed with a Russian sentry. He sticks a knife in him and kind of silences the guy, puts him to the ground. Before he gets up and joins the others, he just gives the guy a little affectionate pat like that. And there's these endless little touches within this that just make this film so unique and so special, and I don't think many people other than Peckinpah, these things wouldn't have occurred to other directors, I think, but it kind of helps, particularly for an English-speaking audience, you come to like Steiner and the core members of his platoon, the guys you get to know. You quickly get to like them, and you want them to win out. You want them to get through this. Whereas I suppose this universal soldier aspect to it, that, we're, I think, supposed to view this as we're not judging the characters in this on what side they're on. We're looking at them as men who are really striving to survive under circumstances that are beyond their control. They are, by now, if they ever were, seduced by the rhetoric or the ideology that led Germany to be in as it's described, as out of place as a bottle of 1930 Moselle in this part of the world. If they ever were invested in any kind of ideological crusade on that front, they are long past that by the time of these events. Most of them anyway. I mean, there's rather more problematic character of Zoll, played by Arthur Browse. But anyway, a lot is said within the extras here about Peckinpah's genius as an editor, because I think he wasn't the unique editor on this, but he oversaw a lot of it. And it's nearly 40 years, I think, since I first saw this, and it has lost none of its impact on me. I'm riveted by this film. It's just something about the pacing of it and the editing of it keeps you locked in. Something about it, I think the filming technique involved a lot of cameras, a lot of angles, and then Peckinpah would assemble this edit from this huge wealth of material and just sort of dance between perspectives. And it's done so well in this, although, under the circumstances, when you look into the background of it, you realise what with Peckinpah's drinking and the politics going on in the background, this was achieved on this kind of knife edge. It must have steered so close to disaster, financial or otherwise. Now, some of it seems to have been quite a lot of improvisation at play during the making of this. I mean, it sounds like it's very hard to get hold of the original shooting script, but the end result seems to have deviated quite a lot from that. I mean, one example is that there's quite a lot of footage, interview stuff with the actor Roger Fritz, who played Treebig. Roger Fritz explains in the extras he was never even intended to be an actor in this. The actor for his role, I believe, was supposed to be Helmut Grime, who ironically went on to play Captain Stransky in the very poor sequel a couple of years later, which I'll discuss the book of in another video. But he wasn't available, and Roger Fritz was just talked into taking that role. But it was him who, he was up to that point, he'd been kind of, I think, second unit direction and sort of general consultancy or advice stuff, and I think it was him who persuaded Peckinpah. There's the character of the Russian kid. Now, he's nowhere in the novel. I think Roger Fritz suggested this needed something extra, some humanising element on top of what they had, so this was written into it. And there's a lot of things like that. Now, most famously, the improvisation happened on the end of it. I think a source of some behind-the-scenes conflict was the relationship with the producer. Why am I holding up this dubious item? What is the connection? Well, the producer, a man named Wolfgang Hartwig, had up to this point largely been involved in German exploitation films, including what turned out to be a fairly successful, I gather, series of films, I think sort of loosely dressed up as kind of educational, but basically grot films. The Schoolgirl Report flicks, which this I think is a late 90s soundtrack album. More music from sexy German films. So that is Hartwig's background up to this point. I think he wanted to get involved in something more serious or more substantial, so he takes on the role of that in Cross of Iron. Now, I believe he may have been the source of quite a lot of behind-the-scenes conflict. However, I think he did succeed in, against the odds, securing funding and resources and equipment. So, I suppose some credit has to be due there. Famously, conflict and the big improvisational scrabble happened at the end of the film, which wasn't, I'm not even sure what was scripted. There's talk of a scene in which Stransky attempts to escape by aeroplane and all these kind of things. That obviously didn't happen. What I think went on was the funding. The producers just got spooked by Peckinpah's overspend. They shut things down. Ultimately, it was this kind of last day where it's kind of, well, you're going to have to come up with an ending today. That's it. We stop after today. So what you get is probably a rather stressed out, hastily improvised, whatever they could do almost on the spot. Now, I don't think it floors the film. I think it kind of works perfectly well, really. It's, I've never felt there was this kind of unanswered anything there. That's probably what's quite paradoxical about it. Given the circumstances of the making of it, the film has just come out as, I can't seriously pick flaws with it. I can point out little oddities and so on, but I can't say they spoil it. One thing that the ending does emphasise is circumstances have changed since the Second World War, but it's talking about eternal and recurring themes. There's that Bertolt Brecht quote that flashes up right at the end. Do not rejoice, you men, because the world stood up and stopped him. The bitch that bore him is in heat again. But I don't need to draw a diagram to depict, I suppose, at this point how relevant that still is. I think Peckinpah's intention with this was to be an anti-war statement. I think it endures quite powerfully as that. One of the all-time great directors. Now, he may have been sort of leaning towards a point at which his career would go off the rails, but he's somehow holding it together here. Oh, you've got this just flawless main cast. They're all giving it everything, investing a great deal into this. There's, and you get the feeling that, I know Coburn had great belief in this and just put his soul into it, and it really shows. So I think it is, contrary to its sort of relative bad reception in English-speaking territories, I think it is one of those enduring films that deserves this kind of treatment. Now, whether you'd want to splash, I think there are cheaper options for this restored edition. If you're a long-time fan of this, I don't know if I'd want to spend over 70 like some people are charging for it, but 40-something quid, I can't really complain at that. I think it is a film of a stature that does merit this nice plush treatment, and the restoration job is, I think, something to write home about. So no regrets. Once again, enjoyed yet another viewing of this film and still come away from it. You go through a whole emotional journey with this one. That's as true today as the first time I ever watched it.